The blood-red sunset cast long shadows over Denver's dusty streets, as Katharine Reeves struggled against the iron grip of the two men dragging her toward their waiting horses. Dust clouded around her boots as she dug her heels into the dirt, her honey-blonde hair falling loose from its pins as she fought with every ounce of strength in her petite frame. "Let me go," she screamed, her voice barely carrying over the bustle of the busy trading post at the edge of town. No one seemed to notice, or if they did, they weren't willing to intervene. In 1875 Colorado, folks tended to mind their own business, especially when trouble involved Silas Watkins and his brother Jeremiah, notorious for their violent tempers and connections to the cattle-rustling gangs that plagued the territory. "Shut your mouth, woman," Silas growled, his whiskey-soured breath hot against her face as he yanked her arm harder. "You're coming with us whether you like it or not. Your pa's debt is due." "My father owes you nothing," Katharine spat back, though she knew it was a lie. Her father's gambling debts had finally caught up to them, and now these men intended to take payment in the worst way possible. The sound of a revolver being cocked cut through the commotion. A deep, steady voice followed. "Let her go." The Watkins brothers froze, their grips on Katharine's arms still tight, but their attention now focused behind her. She twisted to see a tall figure standing 20 paces away, his revolver aimed steadily at Silas's head. The setting sun silhouetted him dramatically broad-shouldered, lean-hipped, with a Stetson pulled low over his eyes. "This ain't your concern, Mason," Jeremiah snarled, recognizing the man. "This is business between us and old man Reeves." Mason Tucker stepped forward, his boot heels making a deliberate rhythm in the dirt. His face came into view strong-jawed, with intelligent blue eyes that never wavered from their target. A thin scar traced his left cheekbone, evidence of some past violence. "I'm making it my concern," he replied, voice even. "Now I won't ask again. Let her go." The standoff lasted 5 thundering heartbeats before Silas shoved Katharine away roughly. She stumbled but managed to keep her footing, quickly moving toward the stranger with the gun. "You're making a mistake, Tucker," Silas warned. "Reeves owes us $200. If we don't collect from him or her, we'll be collecting from you." "I suggest you try your luck at the tables instead," Mason replied coolly. "Now ride out." The Watkins brothers hesitated, clearly calculating their chances before slowly backing toward their horses. "This isn't over," Jeremiah called as they mounted up. Mason kept his revolver trained on them until they disappeared down the road in a cloud of dust. Only then did he holster his weapon and turn to Katharine. "Are you hurt, Miss Reeves?" he asked, his voice gentler now, concern evident in his eyes. Katharine smoothed her skirts, trying to regain her composure. "No, I'm fine. Thank you, Mr. Tucker." "I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't come along." "Nothing good," he replied grimly. "The Watkins brothers aren't known for their gentle ways." He studied her for a moment. "Your father's in trouble again." She looked away, ashamed. "Yes, he swore he'd stopped gambling, but—" Her voice trailed off. Everyone in Denver knew Harold Reeves's reputation. Mason nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Let me walk you home. They might circle back." Katharine hesitated. Mason Tucker was something of a legend in Denver, a former Texas Ranger turned bounty hunter who'd settled in Colorado 3 years prior. He'd opened a modest horse trading post and kept mostly to himself, though whispers of his past deeds followed him like shadows. Some said he'd killed a dozen men, others claimed the number was higher. But in that moment, all Katharine knew was that he had saved her, and his eyes, despite their intensity, held no malice. "Thank you," she said finally. "I'd appreciate that." As they walked the half-mile to the modest house where Katharine lived with her father on the outskirts of town, the setting sun gave way to dusk. Mason kept a respectful distance but remained vigilant, his hand never straying far from his sidearm. "You shouldn't be out alone, especially not so close to nightfall," he said after they'd walked in silence for several minutes. "I was closing up the mercantile for Mr. Holloway," she explained. "I work there 3 days a week. We had a late shipment." She glanced at him sideways. "And I usually don't have trouble." Times are changing, Mason replied. The railroad's bringing all sorts through Denver these days, not all of them honorable. They reached the small wooden house that had been Katharine's home since she was 15, when her father had moved them west from St. Louis after her mother's death. The lights were out. Her father wasn't home, likely at one of the gambling houses that had sprung up all over Denver. Thank you again, Mr. Tucker, she said, pausing at the gate. I don't know how to repay your kindness. Mason removed his hat, revealing thick dark hair. In the dying light, she could see his features more clearly. He was younger than she'd thought, perhaps 30, with lines at the corners of his eyes that spoke of harsh sun and harsher experiences. No repayment necessary, Miss Reeves, he said. But you should know men like the Watkins brothers don't give up easily. They'll be back for what they believe they're owed. Katharine felt cold fear grip her heart. What should I do? Mason considered for a moment. How much does your father owe them? $200, as Silas said. But we don't have it. The house is mortgaged, and I only make $12 a week at the mercantile. Mason nodded thoughtfully. I might be able to help. I need someone to keep the books at my trading post. The previous girl left to get married last month. The pay is fair $18 a week. Katharine's eyes widened. That was a considerable increase from her current wages. But I know nothing about horses. A small smile touched Mason's lips. You don't need to know horses, you need to know numbers. Can you read and write? Do basic accounting? Yes, of course. I attended school in St. Louis before we came west. Then you're qualified. You can start tomorrow if you'd like. Katharine hesitated. Working for a man like Mason Tucker came with complications. Denver was still small enough that people talked, and her reputation was one of the few things she had left. But the alternative, facing the Watkins brothers again, was unthinkable. I'll be there at 8, she decided. Mason nodded, placing his hat back on his head. I'll escort you to and from work until this business with the Watkins brothers is settled. It wasn't a question. That's not necessary. It is, he interrupted firmly. I'll be here at 7:30. He tipped his hat and turned to leave. Mr. Tucker, she called after him. He paused, looking back. Why are you helping me? You barely know me. For a long moment he was silent. Then he said quietly, I've seen what happens when good people have nowhere to turn. Sleep well, Miss Reeves. As Katharine watched him walk away, his tall figure disappearing into the gathering darkness, she couldn't help but wonder what demons drove Mason Tucker to act as he did, and what it might mean for her own future. The next morning dawned clear and cool, the September air carrying the first hints of autumn. Katharine rose early, dressing carefully in her best work dress, a simple blue calico with a crisp white collar. She pinned her hair neatly, determined to present herself as professional and capable. Her father had returned sometime in the night. She found him slumped in a chair, reeking of whiskey. She shook him gently. Father, wake up, we need to talk. Harold Reeves blinked blearily up at his daughter, his once handsome face now haggard from years of hard living. Katie, what time is it? Nearly 7. Father, the Watkins brothers came after me yesterday. They said you owe them $200. He paled, sobriety finding him quickly. Did they hurt you? No, Mason Tucker intervened. He's offered me a position at his trading post, better pay than the mercantile. I've accepted. Harold ran a shaking hand through his graying hair. Tucker, the bounty hunter. Katie, that man's dangerous. You can't work for him. I don't have a choice, she replied firmly. We need the money and I need protection. The Watkins brothers won't give up. I'll handle Silas and Jeremiah like you've handled everything else. The words came out sharper than she intended, and she immediately regretted them when she saw the hurt in her father's eyes. More gently, she continued, Father, I love you, but we both know you can't protect me from them. I'll be fine with Mr. Tucker. He seems honorable. Harold looked unconvinced but too worn down to argue. Be careful, Katie. Men like Tucker have dark pasts for a reason. At precisely 7:30, a knock came at the door. Katharine opened it to find Mason waiting, mounted on a magnificent chestnut gelding and leading a gentle-looking dappled mare. Good morning, Miss Reeves, he greeted her, hat already in hand. I thought you might prefer to ride rather than walk. Katharine stared at the mare in surprise. I haven't ridden in years. Daisy's gentle as they come, Mason assured her, and it's nearly 2 miles to the trading post. She hesitated only briefly before nodding. Let me get my shawl. Minutes later, with her father watching worriedly from the doorway, Mason helped her mount the mare. His hands were strong but gentle at her waist, lifting her as though she weighed nothing. The brief contact sent an unexpected warmth through her that she quickly dismissed as she settled into the saddle. As they rode through Denver's awakening streets, Katharine became aware of the curious glances cast their way. Mason Tucker rarely rode with company and certainly never with a young woman. She sat straighter in the saddle, chin held high. People are staring, she murmured. People always stare, he replied indifferently. It doesn't matter what they think. It matters to me, she countered. A woman's reputation is her most valuable asset. He glanced at her, something unreadable in his blue eyes. Is that what they taught you in St. Louis? It's what life has taught me everywhere, she replied. When you have little else, your good name becomes everything. Mason's expression softened slightly. Your name is safe with me, Miss Reeves. I promise you that. The Tucker trading post stood on 5 acres at Denver's western edge. The main building was a large, sturdy structure of log and stone with a wide porch across the front. Behind it stretched several corrals containing horses of various breeds and colors. A barn and several smaller outbuildings completed the property. As they dismounted, a young boy of about 16 hurried forward to take the horses. "Morning, Mr. Tucker," the boy greeted cheerfully. "Morning, Tommy. This is Miss Reeves. She'll be handling the books from now on." Tommy's eyes widened slightly as he looked at Katharine, clearly surprised by her presence. "Pleased to meet you, madam. Tommy helps with the horses," Mason explained. "Best hand with a difficult colt I've ever seen." The boy beamed at the praise before leading the horses away. Inside, the trading post was larger than it appeared from outside, with a spacious front room containing a counter and several chairs where, Katharine presumed, business was conducted. Mason led her through to a smaller back office with a desk, accounting ledgers, and shelves of papers. "This will be your domain," he said. "The books need organizing. My system isn't the best. Customers come to buy or trade horses, and we record everything here. We also supply the army at Fort Collins with remounts occasionally." Katharine surveyed the somewhat chaotic stacks of papers. "I can manage this. It just needs a proper system." "Good." Mason hesitated. "There's something else you should know. My business isn't just horses. I still take bounty commissions, occasionally tracking fugitives." She nodded slowly. "I'd heard as much." "It means I sometimes leave for days at a time. Tommy will be here and Mrs. Gunderson comes in to clean twice a week. You won't be alone, but you want to be sure I understand what I'm getting into," she finished for him. "Yes," she met his gaze steadily. "I understand, Mr. Tucker. And I appreciate your honesty." Something like relief crossed his face. "Good, I'll leave you to get acquainted with the books. Let me know if you need anything." Alone in the office, Katharine took a deep breath and rolled up her sleeves. The work would be a welcome distraction from her troubles, and the isolation of the trading post suddenly seemed like a blessing. Here, at least, the Watkins brothers wouldn't find her easily. She spent the morning organizing the ledgers, creating a system that would make tracking sales and purchases more efficient. By midday, she'd made significant progress and was starting to understand the scope of Mason's business. It was larger than she'd expected, with regular customers from as far away as Wyoming and New Mexico. At noon, Mason appeared in the doorway. "You should eat," he said, holding out a cloth-wrapped package. "Mrs. Gunderson left food." Katharine accepted it gratefully, finding bread, cheese, and an apple inside. "Thank you. Your business is quite extensive," he shrugged, leaning against the doorframe. "Horses are always in demand out here, good ones especially. And you have a good eye for them, I learned from my father." "He raised horses in Texas before." "He trailed off before," she prompted gently. Mason's expression closed slightly. "Before he was killed, rustlers, I was 15. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "I lost my mother when I was about that age, consumption." Something passed between them, then a shared understanding of loss that needed no further words. Mason nodded once, then straightened. I need to check a new mare that came in yesterday. She seems to be favoring her left foreleg. After he left, Katharine found herself thinking about the brief glimpse he'd given her into his past. Mason Tucker was clearly a man shaped by tragedy, just as she had been. Perhaps they weren't so different after all. The afternoon passed quickly as she continued organizing the office. Around 4 o'clock, she ventured outside to stretch her legs and found Mason in one of the corrals, working with a spirited black stallion. She watched from the fence as he moved with confident grace, speaking softly to the horse as it pranced around him. There was something mesmerizing about the way man and animal communicated, a dance of trust being built with each careful movement. When the stallion finally allowed Mason to stroke its neck, she couldn't help but smile. "He's magnificent," she called. Mason looked up, seeming unsurprised by her presence. "He is. Mustang blood caught wild near Pike's Peak last month. He'll make a fine stud if I can gentle him enough. You have a gift with them." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Horses are straightforward. They tell you exactly what they're thinking if you know how to listen." "Unlike people," she observed, "exactly unlike people." He gave the stallion a final pat and exited the corral, securing the gate behind him. "It's getting late. We should head back to town before dark." The ride back was quiet, both of them lost in their thoughts as the sun began its descent toward the mountains. Katharine found herself relaxing in Mason's company, the initial unease of the morning having faded considerably. As they approached her house, however, her comfort evaporated at the sight of two familiar horses tied outside. "The Watkins brothers," she whispered, fear gripping her heart. Mason's face hardened. "Stay behind me." They dismounted, and Mason drew his revolver before approaching the house. The door stood slightly ajar. He pushed it open with the barrel of his gun, revealing Silas and Jeremiah Watkins standing over Harold Reeves, who sat at the table with a bloody lip and fear in his eyes. "Gentlemen," Mason said coldly, his gun steady, "I believe I made myself clear yesterday." Silas turned, his hand dropping to his own weapon. "This doesn't concern you, Tucker. Reeves here was just explaining how he plans to pay his debt." "Father," Katharine rushed past Mason to her father's side, "what have they done to you?" "Just a reminder of what happens to men who don't honor their commitments," Jeremiah sneered. Mason stepped further into the room, his presence commanding attention. "The debt is now my concern. I'll pay it." 4 pairs of eyes turned to him in surprise. "What?" Silas asked, suspicious. $200, isn't that right?" Mason reached into his coat and pulled out a leather wallet. "I'm buying the debt. You'll take the money and leave the Reeves family alone from now on." Silas's eyes narrowed. "Why would you do that?" "My reasons are my own," Mason replied evenly. "Do we have a deal?" The brothers exchanged glances, clearly calculating. Finally, Silas nodded. "Deal, but it's $250 now with interest." $200 was the agreed amount, Mason countered, his voice dropping dangerously. "That's what you'll get." Something in his tone must have convinced them not to push further. Silas extended his hand and Mason counted out the bills, never taking his eyes off the brothers. "We're square," Silas declared, tucking the money away, "but this town's getting too complicated for my taste. Come on, Jeremiah." Only when the sound of their horses had faded did Mason holster his weapon. Katharine was already tending to her father's split lip with a damp cloth. "Mr. Tucker," Harold began, his voice thick with emotion, "I don't know how to thank you." "You can thank me by staying away from the gambling tables," Mason replied bluntly. "Your daughter shouldn't have to clean up your messes." Harold flinched at the harsh words but nodded. "You're right, I know you're right." Katharine looked up at Mason, her eyes filled with a mixture of gratitude and uncertainty. "Why did you do that? $200 is a small fortune." Mason met her gaze, his expression unreadable. "Consider it an advance on your wages. It would take months for me to earn that much." "Then you'll be working for me for months," he replied simply. "Is that a problem?" She studied him, trying to understand his motives. Was this charity, business, something else entirely? Whatever his reasons, he had saved her family from certain violence, perhaps worse. "No," she said finally. "That's not a problem at all." As Mason left, promising to return in the morning, Katharine watched from the doorway. The enigma of Mason Tucker had only deepened, but so had her respect for him. He was a man of contradictions, capable of violence yet protective, distant yet surprisingly compassionate. And despite herself, she realized she was looking forward to learning more about him in the months to come. The next few weeks established a routine that brought unexpected comfort to Katharine's life. Each morning, Mason arrived with Daisy, and they rode to the trading post together. The work was engaging. She brought order to the chaotic bookkeeping system, expanded their correspondence with potential buyers, and even suggested improvements to their record, keeping that Mason readily adopted. October painted the cottonwoods golden along Cherry Creek, and the air grew crisper with each passing day. Katharine found herself watching the changing season from the trading post's front porch during her midday breaks, often joined by Tommy, who regaled her with tales of the horses' personalities and quirks. Mason remained somewhat reserved, though his initial formality gradually softened. He began joining her for lunch occasionally, sharing stories of noteworthy horses he'd trained and interesting customers he'd encountered. He never volunteered information about his years as a Texas Ranger or his bounty hunting experiences, and Katharine never asked, sensing those topics remained painful. One bright Tuesday in late October, Katharine was reviewing the monthly accounts when she heard a commotion outside, voices raised in alarm and the panicked whinnying of horses. She hurried to the window to see smoke rising from the largest corral, where dry hay had somehow caught fire. Mason and Tommy were rushing to move the horses while trying to douse the flames. Without hesitation, Katharine grabbed a bucket, filled it at the pump, and ran to help. For the next frantic half-hour, the three of them fought the fire, finally extinguishing it before it could spread to the barn or other structures. By the end, they were all soaked, soot-streaked, and exhausted. "Everyone all right?" Mason asked, his voice hoarse from smoke. When they nodded, he surveyed the damage. "Could have been worse. We didn't lose any horses." "How did it start?" Katharine asked, pushing damp hair from her face. Mason's expression darkened. "Not by accident. Look." He pointed to the remains of a bottle in the charred hay. "Someone threw this over the fence." "Who would do such a thing?" Katharine gasped. "I have enemies," Mason said grimly. "People don't always appreciate when you bring in their kin to face justice." Tommy looked nervous. "You think it's related to that Johnson fellow you brought in last month?" Mason nodded. "His brothers swore revenge. I didn't think they'd act on it." Katharine felt a chill that had nothing to do with her wet clothes. "Are we in danger?" Mason's eyes met hers, and she saw concern there, concern for her. "I won't let anything happen to you," he said quietly. "But perhaps you should take a few days away until I sort this out." "No," she replied firmly. "I won't be frightened away. This is my job, and these are my friends." The word slipped out before she could consider it, but she realized it was true. In the weeks she'd been at the trading post, Mason and Tommy had become important to her. Something like surprise, followed by warmth, flickered in Mason's eyes. "Then we'll face it together, but we'll need to be vigilant." That evening, as they rode back to town, Mason was unusually talkative, perhaps driven by the day's events. "I was 17 when I joined the Rangers," he said without preamble. "After my father was killed, I was angry, looking for purpose. They gave me that. Taught me to track, to shoot, to survive." Katharine listened, sensing the importance of him sharing this part of himself. "I was good at finding people who didn't want to be found," he continued. "Too good, maybe. After 8 years, I'd seen too much of what people can do to each other. I came to Colorado looking for something different." He glanced at her. "I thought horses would be simpler." "But your past followed you," she observed softly. He nodded. "It has a way of doing that. I should have considered what it might mean for those around me." "You can't live your life alone because of what might happen, Mason." It was the first time she'd used his given name, and it hung in the air between them, intimate and significant. He looked at her then, really looked at her, as if seeing something new. "No," he agreed quietly. "Perhaps you're right, Katharine." The use of her full name, not the diminutive Katie that everyone else used, sent a pleasant warmth through her. In that moment, something shifted between them, a barrier lowering, a distance closing. When they reached her house, Mason dismounted to help her down as usual. But this time, his hands lingered at her waist a moment longer than necessary, and her palms rested on his broad shoulders, feeling the strength beneath. "Thank you," she murmured, though whether for the assistance or for trusting her with his past, she wasn't entirely sure. "I'll see you in the morning," he replied, his voice deeper than usual. As she watched him ride away, Katharine acknowledged to herself what she'd been trying to deny for weeks. She was developing feelings for Mason Tucker that went far beyond employer and employee, beyond even friendship. And if she wasn't mistaken, he might be feeling the same way. The attempted arson at the trading post proved to be merely the opening salvo in a series of escalating incidents. 2 days later, Tommy discovered that someone had tampered with the well, dropping something foul down it that rendered the water undrinkable. The day after that, Mason found a threatening note nailed to the trading post door, promising that what belongs to Johnson will be taken from Tucker. Mason's face grew grimmer with each new development, and Katharine noticed that he began wearing 2 guns instead of 1. He insisted on escorting her not just to and from work, but also on the rare occasions when she needed to visit town during the day. "The Johnsons are watching the trading post," he explained when she protested that she could walk the short distance to the general store alone. "They've seen you with me, that makes you a target." She couldn't argue with his logic, especially after what had happened to her father for his unwillingness to take threats seriously, but the constant vigilance wore on them all. Tommy jumped at shadows and Mason slept at the trading post most nights, keeping watch. One evening in early November, as they were closing up for the day, Mason made a decision. "We need to draw them out," he told Katharine as they sat in the office. "This waiting is taking its toll on all of us." "How do you propose to do that?" she asked, concern evident in her voice. "I'm going to leave for a few days. Make it known that I'm heading to Pueblo on business." He held up a hand to forestall her protest. "I won't actually go. I'll circle back and watch the trading post. When the Johnsons make their move, I'll be ready." "And what about Tommy and me? Are we bait in this plan?" Mason's expression softened. "No, you'll both stay with Sheriff Henderson in town. I've already spoken to him." "So you made this decision without consulting me," she said, unable to keep the hurt from her voice. "Katharine," he said gently, "this isn't about trust, it's about keeping you safe." "By luring dangerous men to destroy everything you've built," she challenged. "There must be another way." "If there is, I haven't found it." He ran a hand through his hair, a rare gesture of frustration. "The Johnsons won't stop until they've taken their revenge or been stopped themselves. I can't live looking over my shoulder, wondering when they'll strike next or who they'll hurt." Katharine realized with sudden clarity how much the trading post and the people in it meant to Mason. This wasn't just about protecting his property, it was about protecting what had become his home, his makeshift family. "Then let me help," she insisted. "Not as bait, but as another set of eyes. Sheriff Henderson can protect Tommy, but I can be useful." "Absolutely not," Mason replied firmly. "It's too dangerous." "I'm not some fragile flower, Mason Tucker," she retorted, standing to face him. "I grew up learning to shoot from my father. I can handle a rifle, and I know this place as well as you do by now." Mason looked genuinely surprised. "You can shoot." "My father may have his faults, but he believed a woman alone should be able to defend herself." She crossed her arms. "I'm a good shot, and you need someone watching your back." He studied her for a long moment, conflict evident in his blue eyes. Finally, he sighed. "If and only if you agree to follow my instructions exactly, I'll consider it." It wasn't a yes, but it wasn't a firm no either. Katharine counted it as progress. The next morning, Mason made a show of packing saddlebags and announcing loudly to Tommy, within earshot of several customers, that he was headed to Pueblo to meet a horse buyer and would return in 4 days. He gave Tommy explicit instructions to close up early and stay with the sheriff until his return. To Katharine, he gave a significant look as he mounted up. 4 days, he said. "Take care of things while I'm gone." She nodded, understanding the hidden message. That night, after ensuring that Tommy was safely installed at Sheriff Henderson's house, she slipped back to the trading post under cover of darkness. Mason was waiting at the back door. "I still think this is a mistake," he said as he let her in. "Noted," she replied dryly. "Now, what's the plan?" Inside, Mason had prepared for a siege. Extra ammunition was stacked near the windows, and he had moved furniture to create defensive positions. Lanterns were at the ready but unlit to avoid revealing their presence. "I expect they'll come tonight or tomorrow," he explained. "They'll want to burn the place with me supposedly far away. They're cowards at heart. And if they don't come, then we repeat this for as long as it takes." They settled in to wait, speaking in hushed tones as night deepened around the trading post. Mason took the first watch while Katharine tried to rest on a pallet he'd prepared in the office. Sleep proved elusive, however, with her nerves stretched taut and her mind racing with all the ways this plan could go wrong. After tossing and turning for an hour, she gave up and joined Mason by one of the front windows. "Can't sleep?" he asked softly. She shook her head. "Too much thinking," he nodded, understanding. "It's always the waiting that's hardest." "Is that why you gave up bounty hunting?" she asked. "The waiting," Mason considered the question. "Partly, but mostly it was the cost." "The cost, to my soul," he clarified, his voice low. "Every man I brought in guilty or innocent changed me a little, made me harder, colder." He glanced at her, his expression thoughtful in the dim moonlight filtering through the window. "Until recently, I wasn't sure I could feel anything deeply anymore." The implication of his words hung between them, charged with meaning. Katharine's heart beat faster as she ventured to ask, "And now?" Before he could answer, a soft sound outside caught their attention. Mason raised a finger to his lips and moved silently to another window for a better view. Katharine followed his lead, peering carefully into the darkness. 3 shadowy figures were moving between the corrals, approaching the main building with furtive caution. One carried what looked like a coal oil lantern. "Johnson and his brothers," Mason whispered, "right on schedule." He motioned for Katharine to take position at the other front window, passing her a rifle. She took it with steady hands, chambering around as quietly as possible. "Wait for my signal," he instructed. "We want to catch them in the act." The minutes crawled by as they watched the men creep closer, finally reaching the front porch. One began pouring liquid coal oil, presumably along the base of the building, while another prepared to light the lantern. "Denver Sheriff's Office, drop your weapons." Mason's voice boomed out as he flung open the door, his revolver leveled at the startled men. Katharine appeared at the window, rifle aimed. What happened next unfolded with terrifying speed. The men scattered, one dropping the lantern, which shattered but thankfully didn't ignite the spilled oil. Gunfire erupted as the Johnsons dove for cover behind water troughs and fence posts. Mason ducked back inside as bullets splintered the doorframe. "They're positioned to surround us," he called to Katharine. "Watch the back door." She moved quickly to the rear of the building, heart pounding but hands steady on the rifle. Through the window, she could see one of the men attempting to circle around. When he appeared in her sights, she took careful aim and fired. The man yelped and fell, clutching his leg. "Good shot." Mason called, exchanging fire with the remaining 2 brothers from the front. The gunfight continued for several tense minutes, neither side gaining a clear advantage. Then Katharine heard a worrying sound breaking glass from the office. One of the men had managed to reach a side window unseen. "Mason," she shouted in warning, turning toward the office. As she did, a burly figure lunged through the broken window. She fired, but the shot went wide as the man tackled her to the floor, the rifle clattering away. She fought wildly, kicking and clawing as her attacker tried to pin her down. He was heavy and strong, his whiskey-soured breath hot on her face as he grabbed for her throat. "Tucker's woman," he growled. Eye for an eye, Katharine's fingers scrabbled desperately along the floor, seeking anything to use as a weapon. They closed around a heavy ledger book, which she swung with all her might at her attacker's head. The blow stunned him momentarily, giving her enough space to drive her knee upward with brutal force. The man howled in pain, rolling off her. Katharine scrambled for the rifle, but he recovered quickly, lunging for her again. They grappled for control of the weapon, tumbling against the desk. A gunshot echoed through the office, and for one heart-stopping moment, Katharine couldn't tell who had been hit. Then her attacker slumped against her, blood spreading across his chest. Behind him stood Mason, his revolver still smoking. "Katharine." He was at her side in an instant, pulling the dead man away from her. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head, too shocked to speak immediately. Mason helped her to her feet, checking her for injuries despite her assurance. "The others?" She finally managed to ask. "One wounded, one ran off," Mason replied grimly. "Sheriff Henderson and his deputies should be here soon. The gunfire would have been heard in town." True to his word, within 20 minutes the sheriff arrived with 3 deputies and Tommy, who had insisted on coming along. The scene was secured, the wounded Johnson brother taken into custody, and the body of the one Mason had killed was loaded onto a wagon for transport to the undertaker. Sheriff Henderson took their statements, looking increasingly impressed as the story unfolded. "That was quick thinking, Tucker," he said. "Setting a trap like that, and Miss Reeves," he shook his head in wonderment. "I wouldn't have believed it if I hadn't seen that wounded man myself." "You're quite a shot. She saved my life," Mason said quietly. "If she hadn't warned me about the third man," the sheriff nodded understanding. "Well, the remaining Johnson brother won't get far. I've telegraphed descriptions to the surrounding towns. He'll be picked up within days." He tipped his hat to them both. "Good night, folks. Try to get some rest if you can." After the sheriff and his men departed, Mason, Katharine, and Tommy surveyed the damage to the trading post. Broken glass, bullet holes, and bloodstains marred what had been a peaceful business only hours before. "It can all be fixed," Mason said, seeming to read their thoughts. "Buildings can be repaired." "What about the Johnsons?" Tommy asked nervously. "What if the last one comes back?" "He won't," Mason assured him. "Men like that are cowards at heart. With one brother dead and one headed to prison, he'll run as far and fast as he can." Tommy nodded, accepting this logic. "I'll start cleaning up in the morning," he promised, yawning widely. "You'll start cleaning up after you've had a proper rest," Katharine corrected gently. "Go use the bunk room. It's undamaged." After the boy had gone, Mason and Katharine stood in the ruined office, the events of the night settling heavily upon them. Now that the danger had passed, Katharine found herself trembling delayed reaction to the violence and her narrow escape. Mason noticed immediately. "Here," he said, shrugging out of his coat and draping it around her shoulders. "Sit down before you fall down." She sank gratefully into the desk chair, drawing the coat tighter around herself. It smelled of gunpowder, leather, and something uniquely Mason, a scent she found oddly comforting. "I killed a man tonight," she said after a moment, the reality of it finally hitting her. Mason knelt before her, taking her cold hands in his warm ones. "No, Katharine, I killed him." "You defended yourself admirably, but the killing is on me." "Does it ever get easier?" she asked, meeting his eyes. "Taking a life, it shouldn't," he replied honestly. "The day it becomes easy is the day you lose something essential. But you learn to live with it, especially when the choice is between their life or yours or someone you care about." The tenderness in his voice as he said those last words made her heart skip. She became acutely aware of how close he was, his face only inches from hers, his hands still holding hers. "Mason," she whispered, not even sure what she wanted to say. He reached up slowly, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear with gentle fingers. "You were incredibly brave tonight," he said softly, "and I was wrong to doubt you. We protected each other," she replied. "That's what." She hesitated, then finished, "Friends do." Something flickered in his eyes' disappointment. "Yes," he agreed, standing and putting a careful distance between them. "Friends." The moment had passed, leaving Katharine wondering if she had imagined the intensity between them. Perhaps the night's danger had affected her judgment, making her see feelings that weren't there. "You should rest," Mason said, his voice once again the professional tone she was accustomed to. "Take the cot in my room. It's the most defensible position if anything else happens. I'll keep watch." Too exhausted to argue, Katharine nodded and made her way to Mason's Spartan quarters at the back of the trading post. His room was neat and minimally furnished: a cot, a chest for clothing, a small table with a basin and pitcher, and a single chair. The only personal touch was a worn photograph in a simple frame: a man and woman, presumably his parents, standing proudly beside a young boy who could only be Mason. As she sank onto the cot, still wrapped in Mason's coat, Katharine realized she had crossed some invisible line tonight. She had taken a life, or helped to take one, in defense of this place and the people in it. And despite the horror of that fact, what overwhelmed her most was the certainty that she would do it again without hesitation to protect Mason and Tommy and the life they had built here. Somehow, in the span of just over a month, the Tucker trading post had become her home, and its inhabitants her family, and Mason. Mason had become something she wasn't quite ready to name, but couldn't deny any longer. With that revelation echoing in her mind, she finally surrendered to exhaustion, falling into a deep, dreamless sleep. The days following the Johnson brothers' attack brought significant changes to the trading post and its inhabitants. Word of the gunfight spread quickly through Denver and surrounding areas, drawing curious onlookers and, somewhat unexpectedly, new customers. "Nothing like a good gunfight to bring in business," Tommy observed wryly as they repaired broken windows on the third day after the attack. "Mr. Tucker says we've sold more horses this week than in the entire month before." Katharine smiled at the boys' enthusiasm. "People are fascinated by danger as long as it's over and they weren't involved." The trading post itself was nearly restored, thanks to the combined efforts of the three of them and several neighbors who had volunteered their help. Only Mason's office still showed signs of the violence, with bloodstains on the floorboards that refused to scrub out entirely. "We'll replace that section," Mason had decided after Katharine's third attempt to clean them. "Some marks aren't meant to be erased, just covered over." She had wondered if he was speaking of more than just the floorboards. Their relationship had shifted subtly since that night. Mason was more protective, yet also more respectful of her abilities. He no longer questioned her judgment in business matters and had even begun teaching her about horse trading when time permitted. For her part, Katharine found herself watching him when he wasn't looking: the way his hands moved with gentle confidence when examining a horse, the rare smile that transformed his serious face, the thoughtful furrow of his brow when considering a problem. She noticed, too, how he had begun finding reasons to be near her, bringing her tea in the afternoon, asking her opinion on matters he could easily have decided himself. Yet neither of them spoke of the moment they had shared in the aftermath of the gunfight. It hung between them, unacknowledged but ever present. As November deepened toward winter, bringing early snows to the Colorado foothills, Katharine received an unexpected letter from her father. He had gone to Central City to work in the mines, determined to pay back Mason for settling his gambling debts. "He's actually doing it," she told Mason as they sat in the newly repaired office one evening, going over the month's accounts. "The foreman has agreed to send part of his wages directly to us each month. He hasn't touched a card in 6 weeks." Mason looked genuinely pleased. "That's good news. Your father's a capable man when he sets his mind to something." "He says you inspired him," Katharine admitted, a blush touching her cheeks. "He wrote that seeing how you protected me made him realize how much he'd failed in that duty." Mason shook his head. "You don't need protecting, Katharine. You've proven that." "Everyone needs someone to stand with them," she replied softly. Their eyes met across the desk, and for a moment Katharine thought Mason might say something more. Instead, he cleared his throat and returned to the ledger before him. "These figures look good," he said. "If business continues this way through winter, we might be able to expand in the spring. Perhaps add another corral, hire another hand to help Tommy." "That would be wonderful," she agreed, trying to hide her disappointment at the change of subject. "Speaking of winter, the general store just got a shipment of warm clothing in. I was thinking I might go tomorrow to get something for Tommy for Christmas. His coat is practically threadbare." "That's thoughtful of you," Mason said, something warm in his voice. "I've been meaning to do the same." "Perhaps we could go together." The prospect of spending time with Mason away from the trading post sent a flutter through Katharine's stomach. I'd like that. The next day dawned clear and cold, the recent snow sparkling in the winter sunlight as they rode into Denver. The town had embraced the approaching holiday season, with pine boughs decorating storefronts and red ribbons adorning lampposts. At the general store, they spent a pleasant hour selecting gifts for Tommy, a sturdy new coat from Mason and warm gloves, and a knitted scarf from Katharine. As they were about to leave, Mason paused before a display of ladies' accessories. "That would suit you," he said quietly, nodding toward a simple silver hair comb inlaid with small turquoise stones. Katharine admired it. "It's beautiful. May I?" Without waiting for an answer, Mason purchased the comb along with their other items, ignoring Katharine's protests. Outside, as they prepared to mount their horses, he handed her the small package. "An early Christmas gift," he explained, "and a thank you for everything." Touched by the gesture, Katharine felt bold enough to ask, "Will you help me put it in?" Mason's eyes widened slightly, but he nodded. With careful hands, he took the comb and stepped behind her. She felt his fingers gently gather a section of her hair, twisting it up before sliding the comb into place. His touch lingered just for a moment at the nape of her neck. "There," he said, his voice rougher than usual. "Perfect." When she turned to face him, he was standing closer than she expected. Snow had begun to fall again, delicate flakes catching in his dark hair and on the shoulders of his coat. "Mason," she began, gathering her courage. "I, Miss Reeves, Mr. Tucker." The moment shattered as Sheriff Henderson approached them, waving a piece of paper. "Telegram just came in. Thought you'd want to know they caught the last Johnson brother trying to cross into New Mexico. He's being brought back to stand trial." "That is good news," Mason acknowledged, stepping back from Katharine with a carefully neutral expression. "Thank you, Sheriff." After exchanging a few more pleasantries with Henderson, they mounted their horses and headed back toward the trading post, the snow falling more heavily around them. The easy companionship of earlier had been replaced by an awkward silence, the interrupted moment hanging between them. Finally, as they approached the trading post, Mason spoke. "Katharine, about before it's all right," she interrupted, not wanting to hear him make excuses or, worse, apologize for something she had welcomed. "We should hurry before the snow gets worse." His expression was unreadable as he nodded agreement. That night, alone in her small room at the boarding house where she still kept accommodations, despite spending most of her time at the trading post, Katharine removed the silver comb from her hair and held it, remembering the feel of Mason's fingers against her neck. Something was growing between them, something neither of them seemed ready to name but could no longer ignore. The question was whether either of them would find the courage to acknowledge it before the opportunity slipped away. The opportunity presented itself 2 weeks later, on Christmas Eve. Mason had insisted on closing the trading post early, and he, Katharine, and Tommy were celebrating with a special dinner prepared by Mrs. Gunderson before she left for her own family gathering. The main room of the trading post had been transformed with pine boughs, candles, and a small tree that Tommy had proudly decorated with paper stars and strings of dried berries. A fire crackled in the hearth, casting warm light over the festive scene. After dinner, they exchanged gifts. Tommy was ecstatic with his new coat and accessories, immediately putting them on despite the warmth of the room. Mason received a fine new leather-bound journal from Katharine, who had noticed his habit of recording details about particularly promising horses. And Katharine, in addition to the silver comb she already treasured, received a beautiful leather-bound copy of Tennyson's poems from Mason. "It's perfect," she said, running her fingers over the embossed cover. "How did you know I love poetry?" "I've seen you reading the newspaper's poetry corner during lunch," he admitted with a small smile. "You always look most peaceful then." The thoughtfulness of the observation touched her deeply. As the evening wore on, Tommy began to yawn despite his best efforts to hide it. "I think someone needs sleep," Katharine observed gently. "Christmas morning will come sooner that way." The boy reluctantly agreed, bidding them good night and heading to the bunkroom, leaving Mason and Katharine alone by the fire. "This has been wonderful," she said, looking around at the transformed trading post. "I haven't celebrated Christmas properly since my mother died." "Nor have I," Mason admitted, "not since I left Texas." Katharine studied him in the firelight, noting how the usual tension in his shoulders had eased, how his eyes reflected the dancing flames. "You seem different tonight," he met her gaze. "I feel different, lighter somehow. Because the Johnsons are no longer a threat." "Partly," he acknowledged, "but mostly because of you and Tommy. You've brought something back to this place that I didn't realize was missing." "What's that?" she asked softly. "Life," he replied simply. "Before you came, this was just a business, now it's a home." The word hung between them, full of meaning. Katharine felt her heart quicken as Mason set aside his coffee cup and moved to sit beside her on the small sofa. "Katharine," he began, his voice low and serious, "there's something I've been wanting to say to you." Something I should have said that night after the Johnsons attacked. She held her breath, hardly daring to hope. "Yes, when I thought you might be hurt or worse, I realized something I've been trying to deny for weeks." He took her hand, his touch warm and steady. "I care for you. More than I've cared for anyone in a very long time, perhaps more than I've ever cared for anyone." Joy bloomed in Katharine's chest, but she needed to be certain. "As a friend, as family," Mason's eyes darkened with an emotion she had glimpsed before but never so openly displayed. "As a man cares for a woman he can't imagine living without." The words she had longed to hear rendered her momentarily speechless. Mason misinterpreted her silence, beginning to withdraw his hand. "I understand if you don't feel the same." "I'm not an easy man to." Katharine stopped him by placing her fingers gently against his lips. "Mason Tucker, if you think for one moment that I don't return your feelings, then you are not nearly as observant as a former ranger should be." Relief and happiness transformed his face. "Then you do." "Care for you," she finished for him. "Yes, more with each passing day." Mason's hand came up to cup her cheek, his touch reverent. "I never expected to find you. After everything I've done, everything I've seen, I didn't think I deserved this kind of happiness." "Everyone deserves happiness, Mason," she whispered, "even former rangers who are too stubborn to see what's right in front of them." A genuine smile spread across his face, the most unguarded she had ever seen from him. "I see it now," he assured her, leaning closer. "I see you, Katharine Reeves." When his lips finally met hers, it was with a gentleness that belied his strength. Katharine responded with all the emotion she had been holding back for months, her hands rising to his shoulders as the kiss deepened. It felt like coming home and setting out on an adventure all at once, familiar yet thrilling, safe yet exhilarating. When they finally parted, both a little breathless, Mason rested his forehead against hers. "I love you," he said simply, the words all the more powerful for their quiet certainty. "And I love you," she replied, her heart so full she thought it might burst. Outside, snow continued to fall, blanketing Denver in peaceful white. Inside the Tucker trading post, before the dying embers of the Christmas Eve fire, two people who had each known their share of loneliness found in each other the promise of a future neither had dared to hope for. Christmas morning dawned clear and bright, the world transformed by fresh snow that glittered like diamonds in the early light. Katharine woke in her room at the boarding house with a sense of joy unlike anything she had felt in years. The memory of Mason's kiss, his declaration of love, made her feel as though she were floating rather than walking as she dressed for the day. She had returned to the boarding house late the previous night, despite Mason's offer to escort her in the morning. Some habits of propriety were hard to break, though she had departed with another lingering kiss that had left them both reluctant to part. As she pinned up her hair, adding the silver comb Mason had given her, Katharine found herself studying her reflection with new eyes. The woman looking back at her seemed transformed, cheeks flushed with happiness, eyes bright with anticipation. Love suited her, she decided. When she arrived at the trading post, she found Tommy already outside, gleefully showing off his new coat to the horses while clearing paths through the snow. He waved enthusiastically when he saw her. "Merry Christmas, Miss Reeves. Isn't it the finest day? Mr. Tucker says we're to have a special breakfast, and then we might go sledding if the afternoon stays clear." His excitement was contagious, and Katharine laughed. "Merry Christmas, Tommy." "That sounds wonderful." Inside, she found Mason in the kitchen, attempting with moderate success to prepare breakfast. He looked up when she entered, and the smile that spread across his face at the sight of her made her heart skip. "Merry Christmas," he greeted her, setting aside the pan he was holding to cross the room and take her hands in his. "You're wearing the comb." "Of course," she replied softly. "I treasure it." He leaned down to kiss her gently, then more deeply when she responded with enthusiasm. They broke apart only when Tommy's boots could be heard stomping snow off on the porch. "I should help you with breakfast before we scandalize the boy," Katharine said with a laugh. Together, they prepared a feast of flapjacks, bacon, and coffee, which the three of them enjoyed around the kitchen table, sharing stories and laughter. Katharine couldn't help but think how much they already felt like a family, an unusual one, perhaps, but no less real for that. After breakfast, Mason pulled Katharine aside while Tommy went to finish his chores. "There's something I want to show you," he said, taking her hand and leading her toward the back of the property. Behind the barn stood a small cabin that Katharine had noticed before but never entered. Mason produced a key and opened the door, ushering her inside. The interior was simple but charming, a main room with a fireplace, a tiny kitchen area, and two doors that presumably led to bedrooms. "This was here when I bought the place," Mason explained. "The previous owner used it as a guest house, but I've never had a use for it. I've been fixing it up these past few weeks." "It's lovely," Katharine said, turning to look at him questioningly. "But why show me now?" Mason took both her hands in his expression serious yet tender. "I know this is sudden. We've only just confessed our feelings, but I've never been more certain of anything in my life." He took a deep breath. "Katharine Reeves, I love you. I want to build a life with you. Would you consider becoming my wife?" Though she had begun to hope for this, the reality of his proposal still took her breath away. "Mason." Misreading her hesitation, he hurried on. "We don't have to rush. We can have a long engagement if you prefer. I just wanted you to know my intentions are honorable and my heart is entirely yours." Katharine silenced him with a kiss. "Yes," she said against his lips. "Yes, I will marry you, Mason Tucker." Relief and joy transformed his face as he lifted her off her feet in an uncharacteristic display of exuberance, spinning her around once before setting her back down. "You've made me the happiest man in Colorado," he declared. "And you've made me the happiest woman," she replied, laughing. "But what about my father? Shouldn't you ask his permission?" Mason's expression turned sheepish. "I already did. I wrote to him in Central City last week. His reply came yesterday." He reached into his pocket and produced a letter, which Katharine read with growing amazement. Her father not only gave his blessing but expressed genuine happiness for them both. He also promised to return for the wedding, writing that he was now 6 months sober and had saved enough to begin repaying his debts honorably. "You planned this all so carefully," she marveled. "I wanted everything to be right," Mason admitted. "You deserve nothing less." As they walked back to the main building hand in hand to share their news with Tommy, Katharine felt a sense of completion she hadn't known was possible. In less than 3 months, her life had transformed completely. What had begun with danger and uncertainty, being accosted by the Watkins brothers, rescued by a mysterious former ranger, had blossomed into a love and future she could never have imagined. News of their engagement spread quickly through Denver. Mrs. Gunderson insisted on hosting an engagement dinner, and Sheriff Henderson offered to perform the ceremony whenever they were ready. Even Mr. Holloway from the Mercantile, Katharine's former employer, sent a lovely porcelain tea set as an engagement gift. They decided on a spring wedding, giving them time to prepare and allowing Katharine's father to secure leave from the mine. In the meantime, Mason continued renovations on the cabin, determined to make it a perfect home for them. Winter passed in a whirl of happiness and anticipation. Katharine divided her time between her duties at the trading post and preparations for their wedding and future home. Mason surprised her with his enthusiasm for the latter, offering opinions on curtains and furniture arrangements that she wouldn't have expected from such a typically stoic man. "My mother always said a house isn't a home without a woman's touch," he explained when she teased him about his unexpected interest. "But I think it's more than that. It's the first real home I'll have had since I was 15. I want us to build it together." By March, the worst of winter had passed, and the first signs of spring began appearing in Denver. The snow melted, revealing patches of green, and the trading post grew busier as ranchers and farmers prepared for planting season. One unusually warm afternoon, as Katharine was reviewing orders in the office, a commotion outside caught her attention. Looking through the window, she saw a familiar figure dismounting from a tired-looking horse. Her father. "Father," she exclaimed, rushing outside to greet him. "We weren't expecting you for another month." Harold Reeves embraced his daughter warmly. He looked different from when she'd last seen him, healthier, his face less haggard, his eyes clear. "The mine gave me leave early," he explained, "and I couldn't wait to see you, Katie girl." Mason appeared from one of the corrals, wiping his hands on a rag. "Mr. Reeves," he greeted, extending his hand. "Welcome to Tucker Trading Post." Harold shook Mason's hand firmly. "Tucker, thank you for the invitation and for looking after my daughter." "She looks after herself and all of us quite capably," Mason replied with a fond glance at Katharine. As they showed Harold around the trading post and the cabin that would soon be Katharine and Mason's home, she was struck by how well the two men got along. Her father seemed genuinely impressed by what Mason had built, and Mason treated Harold with respect, never once alluding to his past troubles. That evening, as they sat around the dinner table, Harold raised his coffee cup in a toast. "To new beginnings," he said. "And to the finest man my daughter could have chosen." "To family," Mason added, his eyes meeting Katharine's with such love that it made her breath catch. Later, after her father had retired to the guest room they had prepared for him, Mason and Katharine stood on the porch, looking up at the star-filled Colorado sky. "I never imagined my life could be this full," Mason said quietly, his arm around her shoulders. "For so long, I defined myself by what I'd lost, by the violence I'd seen and done. I never thought I could have peace." Katharine leaned into his embrace. "And now I understand that the past doesn't have to define the future." He turned to face her, framing her face with his hands. "You taught me that, Katharine. You showed me there's more to life than survival." "We taught each other," she corrected gently. "I was just as lost in my way, tied to my father's troubles, unable to imagine a future beyond Denver. You gave me purpose. You gave me home." As they stood together under the vast Colorado sky, their future stretching before them full of promise, Katharine reflected on the strange twist of fate that had brought them together. If not for the Watkins brothers' cruelty, if not for Mason's intervention that fateful day, they might never have found each other. "What are you thinking about?" Mason asked, noticing her thoughtful expression. "How sometimes the worst moments can lead to the best," she replied. "If you hadn't drawn your weapon that day and told those men to let me go," Mason's arms tightened around her. "I'd have found you somehow," he said with quiet certainty. "Some people are meant to find each other, no matter what path they take." In that moment, standing in the circle of his arms with their future home behind them and endless possibilities ahead, Katharine believed him completely. April 18, 1876, dawned clear and mild, perfect weather for a wedding. Katharine stood in Mrs. Gunderson's parlor, where she had been preparing since sunrise. The older woman fussed over the details of her appearance, adjusting the simple white dress they had ordered from Denver's finest dressmaker and arranging the spring flowers in her hair. "You look beautiful, dear Mrs. Gunderson declared, stepping back to admire her handiwork. "Like an angel." Katharine smiled, too nervous and excited to speak. The past weeks had passed in a blur of preparation and anticipation, and now the day had finally arrived. In just an hour, she would become Mrs. Mason Tucker. A knock at the door heralded her father, handsome in his best suit, his eyes suspiciously bright when he saw her. "Katie," he said softly, "you're the image of your mother." She crossed the room to embrace him. "I wish she could be here." "She is, in a way," he assured her, pulling something from his pocket. "I've been saving this for you." He opened his hand to reveal a delicate gold locket. It was hers. She wore it on our wedding day. With gentle hands, he fastened it around her neck. Inside was a tiny portrait of her mother, smiling and youthful, preserved forever in happiness. "It's perfect," Katharine whispered, touching it reverently. "Thank you, Father." The small church in Denver was filled with well-wishers townspeople who had come to respect both Katharine and Mason, ranchers who did business at the trading post, and even Sheriff Henderson and his deputies. Tommy stood proudly as Mason's best man, beaming in a new suit that made him look older than his 16 years. And at the altar waited Mason, more handsome than Katharine had ever seen him in a dark suit, his hair neatly trimmed, his face clean-shaven for the occasion. But it was his expression when he saw her that she would remember forever, a look of such profound love and wonder that it brought tears to her eyes. As her father placed her hand in Mason's, Katharine felt a sense of rightness that transcended words. This man, this complicated, honorable, loving man was her future, her home, her heart. The ceremony itself passed in something of a blur, though she would always remember the steadiness of Mason's voice as he recited his vows, the warmth of his hand as he slid the simple gold band onto her finger, and the tenderness in his kiss when the minister pronounced them husband and wife. The celebration afterward was held at the trading post, which had been transformed by Mrs. Gunderson and several other ladies from town. Garlands of spring flowers decorated the main room, tables groaned under the weight of food and drink, and someone had even brought a fiddle to provide music for dancing. As the sun began to set, casting golden light over the gathering, Mason led Katharine to a quiet corner. "Are you happy, Mrs. Tucker?" he asked, his voice warm with love and a hint of wonder, as though he still couldn't quite believe his good fortune. "Completely," she assured him, leaning up to kiss him lightly. "Are you?" "More than I ever thought possible." He glanced toward the celebration, then back to her, a mischievous light in his eyes that she was seeing more often these days. "What would you say to slipping away early? I have a surprise for you." Intrigued, Katharine allowed him to lead her quietly through the back door and toward their cabin. Inside, she found the main room illuminated by dozens of candles, a bottle of champagne chilling on the table, and a small package wrapped in silk ribbon. "Mason, it's beautiful," she breathed, taking in the romantic scene. "Open it," he urged, nodding toward the package. Inside, she found a set of papers. Confused, she began reading, then looked up at him in shock. "Mason, this is the deed to the trading post," he confirmed, "with both our names on it, equal partners in every way." Tears sprang to her eyes at the significance of the gesture. In 1876, it was practically unheard of for a husband to legally share ownership of his business with his wife. "I don't know what to say." "Say you'll build this place with me," he replied, taking her hands in his. "Not just as my wife, but as my partner. This is your home too, Katharine. Your business, your future." "Our future," she corrected, setting aside the papers to wrap her arms around his neck. "And yes, of course I will." As he bent to kiss her, Katharine knew with absolute certainty that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, equal partners in love and life. Spring gave way to summer, and life at the Tucker trading post settled into a joyful rhythm. Katharine and Mason worked side by side, her organizational skills complementing his knowledge of horses and business acumen. Under their combined leadership, the trading post thrived, expanding to include a larger breeding program and even a small sideline in training horses for specific work. Harold Reeves, true to his word, remained sober and found purpose in helping around the trading post. He had a way with the more difficult horses that even Mason admired, and his presence gave the young couple freedom to occasionally take time away together. On one such day in late August, Mason surprised Katharine with a picnic by a secluded stream in the foothills above Denver. The day was perfect, warm but not uncomfortably so, with a gentle breeze carrying the scent of wildflowers and pine as they sat on a blanket enjoying the meal. Mrs. Gunderson had packed for them. Mason noticed Katharine seemed somewhat distracted. "What's on your mind?" he asked, reaching for her hand. "You've been quiet today." Katharine hesitated, a mixture of nervousness and excitement fluttering in her stomach. "I've been waiting for the right moment to tell you something." Mason's expression grew concerned. "Is everything all right?" Her smile bloomed, radiant with happiness. "More than all right. Mason, we're going to have a baby." For a moment, he simply stared at her, processing her words. Then joy transformed his face, and he gathered her into his arms with a whoop of delight that echoed off the surrounding hills. "A baby," he repeated, wonder in his voice. "When? Dr. Miller says February," she replied, laughing at his exuberance. "Are you happy?" "Happy doesn't begin to describe it," he assured her, his hand moving reverently to rest against her still flat stomach. "A family of our own, Katharine, a child to love and raise together." The depth of emotion in his voice moved her deeply. Mason, who had lost his own family so young, who had lived so many years alone, would now have the chance to be the father he had missed having himself. "You're going to be a wonderful father," she told him softly. "I'll certainly try my best," he promised, "and you'll be an incredible mother." As they sat together in the sunshine, making plans and sharing dreams for their growing family, Katharine reflected on how far they had come in less than a year. From their dramatic first meeting to this peaceful moment of anticipation, their journey had been anything but ordinary. Yet somehow, it had led them exactly where they were meant to be. The months that followed were busy ones at the Tucker trading post. News of Katharine's pregnancy was met with joy by their small community, with Mrs. Gunderson immediately appointing herself unofficial guardian of the mother-to-be's health, and Tommy proudly announcing to everyone that he would be teaching the little Tucker to ride as soon as they were big enough. Mason proved to be both attentive and protective during Katharine's pregnancy, insisting she rest more and hiring additional help for the busy autumn season. When she protested that she wasn't an invalid, he compromised she could continue working in the office. But the more physical aspects of the business would be handled by others until after the baby arrived. "I just want to keep you both safe," he explained when she accused him of being overprotective. "Is that so terrible?" Faced with the love and concern in his eyes, she couldn't remain frustrated with him. "No," she admitted, softening. "It's rather wonderful, actually. But I'm not made of glass, Mason. Women have been having babies since the beginning of time." "Not my baby," he countered, placing a gentle hand on her growing belly. "Not with my wife. How could she argue with that?" As winter settled over Colorado once again, the Tucker cabin became even more cozy and welcoming. Mason had spent the fall adding finishing touches, more shelves for Katharine's growing collection of books, a rocking chair placed strategically near the fireplace, and most precious of all, a cradle he had crafted himself from pine harvested from their own land. "It's beautiful," Katharine marveled, running her fingers over the smooth wood. "When did you find time to make this?" "In the evenings while you were reading," he admitted. "My father made one for me when I was born. I wanted our child to have the same." Such moments of tenderness became more frequent as Mason prepared for fatherhood. The reserve that had been so much a part of him when they first met had gradually given way to a more open expression of his feelings, particularly where Katharine and their coming child were concerned. On a snowy night in mid-February, Katharine woke to the unmistakable beginnings of labor. She touched Mason's shoulder gently, waking him from sleep. "It's time," she said simply. What followed was both the longest and shortest day of their lives. Mason sent Tommy racing through the pre-dawn darkness to fetch Dr. Miller and Mrs. Gunderson, then returned to Katharine's side, determined not to leave her. "I'm scared," she admitted during a lull between contractions, clutching his hand. "What if something goes wrong?" "Nothing will go wrong," he assured her with more confidence than he felt. "You're strong, Katharine, stronger than anyone I know, and I'm right here with you." By late afternoon, as winter darkness began to fall again, their son was born healthy, strong-lunged, and according to Dr. Miller, the spitting image of his father. Mason sat beside the bed, cradling the tiny bundle with a mixture of awe and terror, while Katharine watched them both through exhausted but radiant eyes. "What shall we call him?" she asked softly. Mason studied the tiny face, already showing hints of dark hair like his own. What about William, after my father, William Harold Tucker, Katharine suggested, including her own father's name. It suits him. It's perfect, Mason agreed, carefully transferring their son back to her arms. He's perfect, you're perfect. How did I get so blessed? As she looked up at her husband, this man who had once seemed so formidable and distant, now undone by a 7-pound infant, Katharine felt her heart might burst with love for them both. We blessed each other, she told him. And now we've blessed the world with him. The years that followed brought changes and growth to the Tucker family and their business. William, called Will by everyone except his grandmother, who insisted on the formal William, grew into a strong, curious boy with his father's thoughtful nature and his mother's quick mind. By the time he was 3, Katharine was pregnant again, this time with twins, a boy and a girl they named James and Elizabeth. The family cabin was expanded to accommodate the growing family, and the trading post flourished under the Tuckers' combined management. Mason continued to occasionally take bounty commissions, but only for the most dangerous fugitives, and only when the local law enforcement specifically requested his help. His reputation as both a fair businessman and a formidable lawman brought respect from the community and ensured that trouble rarely came to their door. Harold Reeves remained a steady presence in their lives, doting on his grandchildren and finding renewed purpose in his role as Grandpa Harold. He never returned to gambling, instead channeling his energies into helping with the training program at the trading post, where his gentle way with horses became legendary throughout Colorado. Tommy stayed on as well, growing from a gangly boy into a confident young man who eventually became the trading post's head trainer. At 21, he fell in love with the new schoolteacher, a spirited young woman named Rebecca, who shared his love of horses and the outdoors. Their wedding, held at the trading post in the summer of 1881, brought back memories of Katharine and Mason's own nuptials 5 years earlier. As they watched the young couple exchange vows, Mason squeezed his wife's hand. "Remember when that was us," he whispered. Katharine smiled up at him, the silver comb he had given her still gracing her hair for special occasions. "It still is us," she replied, "every day." The celebration afterward was lively, with Will, now 5, trying his best to teach his 3-year-old siblings to dance while the adults laughed and applauded. As the evening wore on, Mason found Katharine sitting on the porch, watching the sunset with a contemplative expression. "Penny for your thoughts, Mrs. Tucker," he asked, joining her on the bench. "I was just thinking about how it all began," she admitted. "With those awful Watkins brothers dragging me toward their horses and you appearing like some avenging angel with your gun drawn," Mason chuckled. "Hardly an angel, just a man who couldn't stand by and watch something wrong happening." "My hero nonetheless," she said, leaning her head against his shoulder. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't been there that day?" He was quiet for a moment. "Sometimes. But then I look at our life, at our children, our home, everything we've built together, and I can't imagine any other path. This was always where we were meant to be." "Together," she agreed softly. "Always together," he confirmed, pressing a kiss to her temple. From inside came the sound of their children's laughter, mingling with the music and celebration. The trading post, once a simple business, had become the heart of a community, a place of honest commerce, yes, but also of friendship, love, and family. And at the center of it all stood the unlikely love story that had begun with a desperate confrontation on a dusty Denver street, a former Texas Ranger with a troubled past, and a determined young woman with the courage to build a new future. As twilight deepened into night, Mason and Katharine Tucker returned to the celebration, their hands intertwined, their hearts full, and their future stretching before them like the endless Colorado sky, vast, beautiful, and full of promise. 10 years later, on a crisp autumn morning in 1891, the Tucker trading post was busier than ever. What had once been a modest horse trading business had expanded into one of the most respected breeding and training operations in Colorado. The main building had been enlarged twice, additional corrals and a proper stable had been built, and a small but comfortable house for Tommy and his growing family stood near the original cabin. Katharine, now approaching 40 but still as vibrant and determined as ever, stood on the porch watching as Mason worked with a spirited 3-year-old filly in the main corral. At 46, he remained strong and capable, though silver now threaded his dark hair at the temples. The years had been kind to them both, she reflected, bringing far more joy than sorrow. Will, 15 now and the image of his father, worked alongside Mason, learning the family business with the same quiet competence that characterized everything he did. James and Elizabeth, the 12-year-old twins, had gone into Denver with their grandfather to pick up supplies, a responsibility they had recently begun sharing as they grew older. And 7-year-old Margaret, their youngest and most spirited child, sat on the corral fence watching her father and brother with undisguised admiration, her dark braids hanging down her back and her small face intent with concentration. "Mama," she called, noticing Katharine on the porch. "Papa says I can try riding Daisy tomorrow if I finish all my lessons today." "Then you'd better get back to those spelling words," Katharine called back with a smile. Though Denver now had several good schools, the Tuckers had chosen to educate their children at home, with Katharine handling most of the teaching duties and occasional help from Rebecca, who still taught at the town school. Margaret sighed dramatically but obediently hopped down from the fence and trudged toward the house. "Spelling is boring," she complained as she reached the porch. "I'd rather learn to ride like Papa." "You can do both," Katharine assured her, smoothing back a stray lock of hair from her daughter's face. "A Tucker should be as comfortable with books as with horses." This was a familiar refrain in their household, and Margaret nodded reluctantly. "Will says I'll be able to help with the accounts someday if I'm good at arithmetic." "Will is absolutely right," Katharine confirmed, leading her youngest inside to resume her lessons. Later that afternoon, as the children were occupied with their various tasks, Mason found Katharine in the office, reviewing correspondence from potential customers. "How was the filly?" she asked as he dropped a kiss on the top of her head. "Promising," he replied, settling into the chair across from her desk. "Will has a good eye, he spotted her potential right away." Pride warmed Katharine's voice. "He's learning from the best." Mason smiled at the compliment. "I received a letter from the governor today," he said, his tone casual but his eyes watchful. "He's establishing a state law enforcement agency, something between the local sheriffs and the federal marshals. He's asked me to help organize it." Katharine set aside the papers she'd been reviewing, giving him her full attention. "And what did you tell him?" "That I'd discuss it with my wife and partner," Mason replied promptly. "It would mean some travel, at least initially, and it would put the Tucker name back in law enforcement circles." She considered this thoughtfully. They had built a peaceful life here, deliberately staying removed from the dangers of Mason's former profession. Yet she also knew that part of him, the part that believed in justice and protecting others, had never fully disappeared. "You want to do it?" she asked simply. Mason studied her for a moment. "Part of me does," he admitted. "The work is important, but not at the expense of our family or what we've built here." "The children are older now," Katharine observed. "The business is established. Perhaps it's time for a new challenge." Surprise and appreciation mingled in Mason's expression. "You wouldn't mind you doing something you believe in, something important," she shook her head. "I fell in love with a man of principle, Mason Tucker. I wouldn't ask you to be less than who you are." He reached across the desk to take her hand. "After 16 years, you can still surprise me, Katharine Tucker." "Good," she replied with a smile. "I wouldn't want you getting bored with me." "Never," he promised fervently. "Not in 16 years or 60. That evening, after the children were in bed, Mason and Katharine sat on the porch of their home, enjoying the cool autumn air and the starlit sky. The trading post was peaceful at night, with only the occasional soft nickering of horses and the distant hoot of an owl breaking the silence. "I've been thinking about the governor's offer," Mason said, his arm around Katharine's shoulders. "I'll do it, but with conditions. I won't travel more than is absolutely necessary, and I'll train deputies to handle most of the field work. Katharine nodded approval, a wise compromise. I've had an excellent teacher in the art of compromise, he teased, squeezing her shoulders gently. She laughed softly. I seem to recall a rather stubborn Texas Ranger who initially resisted the very idea of compromise. He met his match in an equally stubborn Colorado woman, Mason countered. And he's been grateful for it every day since. As they sat together in companionable silence, reflecting on their journey together, Katharine was struck by how far they had come from that fateful confrontation on a Denver street. The desperate young woman and the solitary lawman had found in each other not just love but a shared purpose, a family, a business, a legacy to pass on to their children. "What are you thinking?" Mason asked, noticing her thoughtful expression. "That I'm grateful," she replied honestly. "For that day when two men dragged me toward their horses and you drew your weapon and told them to let me go. For every day since." Mason's arms tightened around her. "The best decision I ever made." "Mine too," she agreed softly. Above them, stars wheeled in the vast Colorado sky, unchanged from the night they had first acknowledged their love for each other. The world around them had transformed. Denver had grown from a frontier town into a bustling city. The railroad had changed the face of the West, and their own small family had expanded to fill their lives with joy and purpose. Yet some things remained constant: their love for each other, their commitment to building something meaningful together, and the knowledge that home wasn't a place but the people with whom you shared your heart. As Katharine leaned her head against Mason's shoulder, she reflected that life's most precious gifts often came from its most unexpected moments. In saving her that day, Mason Tucker had unknowingly saved himself as well, finding in her the partnership and love that had transformed them both. And in the legacy they were creating together, their children, their business, the values they passed on, their love story would continue, touching lives far beyond their own for generations to come.